using IMAP for the emails because that way it's great for synchronization. Like use local cache. The other stuff is API calls. I just get it once. So
I use RSEC points for the notes generated from meetings.
The transcripts I'm using are first transcripts. So I use because his are cleaned up really well.
That's pretty good.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to RASPRG. We have a very tight agenda, so we are going to try to go quickly over the preliminaries. So, first of all, note well, we have intellectual property matters, which are reflected in the slide that you can see here. The RTF follows the IETF intellectual property rights IPR disclosure rules, and you can see the relevant information in the relevant RFCs. Note that we do audio and video recordings, and whatever you are saying here will be recorded for as long as the internet lasts. We also have a privacy and code of conduct, and you can see relevant information regarding this in the relevant RFCs that you can see in the slides. The goals of the IRTF are not about standardization, and we do not try to standardize anything here. Whatever we are discussing here is research related that might inform future discussions. About RASPRG. RASPRG is the Research Analysis Standardization Processes Research Group. We try to understand the standardization process, and the outputs are joint reports, papers, tools, data, open source software. It is not our goal to do hierarchical comparisons between SDOs or directly influence IETF operations. However, if what we say here or what we do here is helpful for IETF operations, that's very welcome. Alvaro and myself are the chairs, and you can find the charter in the data tracker. Please use the QR code, register, use Meet Echo for Q&A, and speakers, please be ready. We have a little bit of a tight agenda. Is there any volunteer to take notes of this meeting? Thank you very much. That's very welcome. Could you please say your names for the record, because otherwise I will forget. Thank you. Right, and we have already saved a few minutes from the welcome agenda, which hopefully we will be able to use for more meaningful discussion. So we have a very tight agenda with two different blocks. First, we are going to be talking about AI in the standards process, first with Mark Nottingham from Cloudflare, and then with Jaime Jimenez from Ericsson, looking at two different aspects of using AI in standards, one, how to use it, another one, how to identify it. Then Marcelo Santos from the Federal Institute of Certao Pernambucano, if I say it correctly, is going to be talking about the mortality of internet drafts, and then we are going to compensate the mortality with the vitality of the community from Ilhan from RIPE, who is going to be analyzing the RIPE community. And finally, we have Colin Perkins from Glasgow University with a proposed draft on how to analyze Internet Standards Development Organization, with which, for full disclosure, I'm also a co-author. Thank you very much, and that's all from the chair side. Mark, so let me pull up your slides.
Great.
Hello. Okay. I was hoping to do a hierarchical comparison with another SDO, but instead of that, I'll talk about AI, I guess. So I'm going to talk about AI in standards participation. So this is in the process, not, I don't talk about drafts, creating drafts or AI in our protocols. It's more about using AI in the process itself. Next slide, please.
Do I have a clicker? Oh, thank you.
Yep. Lovely. Right. So I don't think this is a surprise to anyone who's spent much time in the IETF recently, especially in the mailing lists. Increasingly, we're seeing people using AI as part of their standards participation process. They're doing it to write emails, to implement things, and to participate in the standards efforts. And in many ways, that's great. And as I will show you, people are building tools and using AI to help them understand what's going on in working groups, to save time, to be more efficient. to broaden their knowledge of what's going on in the IETF. And also, you can look at AI as a very important equity and accessibility tool. People can use AI to translate if English is not their native language, because as we know, we use English for everything in the IETF, for example. And so these are really great things that we see, and it's making our work broader and more efficient. However, we're already starting to see some problems. We're seeing groups that are complaining about being flooded with AI-generated drafts. I heard one working group chair this week complaining that his group had seen 60 AI-generated drafts all in a row. And that's very distracting for the group. We're seeing in some mailing lists people sending really voluminous AI-assisted messages where it just blows out the size, because as we know, AI can be quite loquacious. I actually asked for one of these slides, the previous version, AI, to give me a list of synonyms for wordy, and boy, did it deliver. Worse than that, we do see once in a while now either semi or fully autonomous bots on mailing lists. And it's pretty clear that somebody has said, go and represent this position or push this draft in this working group. And you get these messages, every single thread has a response of, yes, my draft can handle that, blah, 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 blah. Extremely distracting, extremely disruptive to the work. And that's for a few reasons. Also, down at the bottom here, I do mention that, other folks have pointed out that having our understanding of proposals and our understanding of the discourse in the IETF mediated by LLMs is also potentially problematic. I don't address that much in this talk, but I think that's something we should keep in mind. And I think that you can see this even as an existential threat in that using an LLM significantly lowers the barriers for participation. Now it is very easy to create human-looking text. And while in the hands of someone who has good intentions and is using it to sharpen their arguments or to, translate something to English or something like that is a powerful tool, in the hands of someone who just wants to throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks, it just gives them a volumetric attack. And especially for bad actors, this can be really problematic. We're seeing and again, this is qualitative, but I see a lot of people who kind of have a shower idea. They say, oh, I've got a great idea. I want it to be considered by the IETF. And they use an LLM to sketch everything out and throw it at a working group. And then the working group has the task of digesting that and handling it with the due gravity that proposals that people bring here deserve. And the problem is that, we have a volunteer group of people who are protocol experts who provide the expertise and the experience that create our output. IETF's legitimacy is not based upon its input. We're not a representative organization. We don't have representatives of countries or anything here. Our legitimacy is based on our process and our output. And that means that we need to produce high quality specifications. But if the people who help produce those high quality specifications are inundated by a wave of AI slop, we have a problem as an organization. And that's a big vulnerability for the organization, I think. If I put my corporate hat on, which I do ever so rarely, I can't advise my company to bring work to a venue that's a circus. And I feel like that's the direction we're headed in if we don't do anything. So, and here's a quote. I was talking to John Peterson about this earlier this week. And I think John sums it up nicely. Rough consensus and running code are predicated on us having humans coming to that consensus and humans running that code. And AI changes the friction of both of those acts. It's not that it's always bad to use AI, but when it's low friction, it changes the system. The checks and balances for making sure that we have good outcomes change. And so this is a threat to the balance of power at the IETF. So when I think about this, I think about what carrots can we provide? What can we, how can we incent good behavior in a positive fashion? I will get to a different emoji later in the talk. So first of all, I've been working on a tool called IETF LM now for a couple of months. It's been through a number of iterations. I'm not going to give a demo. I'm sorry. Bad experiences. So basically, IETF LM allows you to gather a corpus of materials from the IETF. It's about 22,000 lines of Python that Claude very generously wrote for me. He's very kind. It can run either local on your own machine, or it can run in the cloud. You can host it on Cloudflare, you can host it on Akamai, you can host it on AWS. It just needs an instance and some like S3 or something S3-ish, as well as the ability to do embeddings. It has three modes of operation. You can, like I said, you can run it on your own machine as an MCP server. You can run it as a cloud MCP server, and you can also, this is the older mode of operation. You can gather a folder of files and then point a tool like Notebook LM, if you're familiar with that, at them, and it does the magic. I'm probably going to deprecate that last one because I think the MCP server is a lot more powerful now than that. And it gathers meeting materials. It gathers the mailing lists using IMAP. It creates an syncs to a local cache. Transcripts from Ecker's wonderful transcripts that he's creating for us. The issues lists, if they're available, it figures out where the issues lists are based upon the data tracker page. The drafts that are being discussed, IESG ballots, the relevant RFCs, all of this is munged together, and it does a tremendous amount of processing on it to make it much friendlier to the LLM. So instead of just giving you, raw email, it strips quotes, it strips signatures, it creates markdown files, and it creates the relationships between the emails and creates threads. So the LLM can natively digest the threads, for example, for email. And then it goes and creates embeddings across all these things. So the LLM can do semantic search using the MCP server on that corpus of information. And what you find when you're using it is that, all this information is available to your LLM of choice, Claude, natively. It does the web search tool, and it knows where the IETF is. It does know about us. And so you'll say, tell me what's going on in this working group, and it'll go off and do a couple of web searches and give you a canned result. What you find when you use this tool is that the answer you get back is much, much richer, because effectively the LLM has a budget. When it's doing web search, it says, okay, I'm going to do 3 or 4 searches, and then I've used too many network calls, I've used too much time, I've used too many tokens. I'll give you an answer based upon those 3 or 4 searches. But when it has an MCP server that gives it a very high efficiency interface that's tailored through a lot of iteration to the use cases we have for this tool, you get a lot more complete and accurate answers. And it's really nice to see it when it's working well, which usually it does. That's not why I'm not giving a demo. So what can you do with it? Here are some examples that I've been using it for. The first one, we actually in AI Pref had some fairly contentious discussions, and someone using the tool went off and said, I want to make a proposal for this particular issue, and I want to consider all the arguments that have been made to date. Can you come up with a proposal? And they had a long chat with, I forget which LM they were using, and they came up with a reasonable answer that actually got adopted by the working group as the basis for its solution for that problem, which I think is great. And that was something that hadn't occurred to a human. You can also just kind of keep up with the working group and say what's being discussed currently in this working group or what happened in the last 3 weeks. When you get these voluminous email lists, that's actually really useful to kind of get those summaries. Given the objections to proposal, what can I anticipate for my proposal? The second to last is really interesting. I did this a while back. I asked it to review our chairing of the AI preferences working group and got a report back of how biased we were as chairs. I think it's a super useful tool for self-evaluation by chairs, and it luckily thought we were pretty good. So, and of course, the first query that everybody these days is going to ask, tell me what's going on in the TLS working group recently. If you don't know, look it up. So second of all, that's just an MCP server that gives you this ability to access this rich corpus of material for working groups and research groups. And by the way, it is not just IETF, it's also IRTF. You can just tell it, go keep up with the last call mailing list for me if you want, or the IETF list, although you're welcome to subject yourself to that fire hose. What also became necessary was some context about the IETF itself to give to the LLM to guide its thinking about the IETF. And so I created some skills. If you're familiar with skill files, it's just some markdown to tell the LLM how to do stuff, basically. So the IETF skill is assistance for participating in the IETF. It's right now 3 skills. It's all marked down. It's not any scripts or any helpers yet. And this is how you install it. Don't worry, I'll have this at the end. All of these things that are in these skills are just my personal opinions based upon my experience in the IETF. I'm happy to take comments and issues and pull requests. The first one is IETF interpreting. So it's basically norms for reading what a group decided before you claim it. So, you know, this is based on all the different interactions I had with Claude and how it made assumptions about the IETF that weren't really warranted. So it's saying, you know, we don't vote, and just because it feels resolved on the list doesn't mean it's actually been called for consensus, and that we're all participating as individuals, but there's some nuance to that. Things like that. Teaching about the RFC streams, the fact that if you see an internet draft, it has no actual status in our process unless it's been adopted by a working group, things like that. The second one, and which is a little more interesting, is IETF contributing. If you're an LLM and you're contributing on behalf of a human to a working group, especially in email, what should you be doing? And so it's really trying to drive home the accountability aspect of that, you know, don't operate in an automated fashion. You need to make sure the human understands what it's sending and you know, work through that with the human. Ideally disclose AI involvement. I think that's a great subject for discussion because there's pros and cons to that. Especially the register of the communication. As we know, LMs are quite wordy, and so, you know, telling it to respect people's time and attention and just stick to the facts, give examples where it's necessary, but don't go and do the thing that LLMs do. I've processed a number of messages that really looked AI generated from the lists through these guidelines, and it helps a lot. It cuts down paragraphs to a sentence or two, and that's what I think we want to see. Grounding claims in real things, the nature of consensus, stuff like that. And then finally, the third skill is specific to HTTP. We have an RFC, BCP 56 BIS is using HTTP to build new protocols, building protocols with HTTP. And this is kind of the guidance of how to build, you know, RESTful protocols in the IETF. We also have an HTTP editorial style that we apply to the HTTP working groups drafts. And I chair the HTTP directorate, which is the review directorate for HTTP specifications. And it's a difficult directorate because often a group will come to us at last call and say, hey, look, we did something with HTTP. And we'll say, that's a shame because you're going to have to rip it down to do it right. So we want to give people tools to make this easier. It's very early days, but it's very promising. I've already had a few interactions with working groups using this skill, and it's amazing. You say, go review this draft. It looks through all the advice, and it comes up with a list of proposals and recommendations and concerns about that draft. It's not 100% correct, but it gets you maybe 70 or 80% of the way there. And in the right hands, it gives the reviewers a really powerful tool to take that initial burden off of their review. As the person who assigns the reviews, I always die a little bit inside because I feel like I'm, you know, screwing somebody's week by giving them this voluminous document to read and then trying to argue with someone about. I think it also can help groups. I think eventually we want to get to a place where we give the skill to working groups and say, you run the skill a couple of times, and when you have questions, when you have things that are ambiguous, come to us, and then we'll help you, you know, with humans and the experts. Yeah, so the other emoji. This is the closest I could come to stick. I think we need to discuss policies for AI assisted or automated participation in the IETF. The tools are probably not enough. The carrots are nice and everything, but, you know, there's lots of questions. You know, is pointing an LLM at a list and asking it to argue a point for you autonomously disruptive conduct? I would say it probably is. Personally, we don't have that documented anywhere. We don't have any norm for that or any rules for that. Is stating that you believe another participant is an autonomous LLM, so you're going to ignore their input. Is that harassment or is that unprofessional? Some people might think so. I don't know. That is one possible way to check that kind of behavior, though, so I think we should think about it carefully. What if it's someone who's just being really sloppy in their use of the LLM, but it's still kind of human guided? Is that okay? I don't know. I've heard people talking about disclosure requirements, that you require people to disclose their use of AI. I'm not sure that's going to be productive because people have a strong incentive not to disclose, and they're going to try and get away with it. Maybe if that becomes normal, if everybody's doing it, it might be okay, but I think we need to have a discussion there. I've heard people suggest maybe we should consider how we consider change how we consider new work. So instead of allowing people just to post a 0-0 draft and forcing the working group to look at it, refuse any examination of new drafts until we actually agree on use cases and requirements and have that discussion first. Because we do see a lot of people just throwing ideas over the wall to see if they stick. I've heard people talking about openness of the community. A lot of these problems are coming about because it's really low cost to join the IETF, and despite Jay's best efforts to get a data tracker account and then throw stuff at us, do we need some sort of raised bar for participation in the community? I think that it's going to make a lot of people deeply uncomfortable and change the nature of the community, but that's one of the defenses I've heard people talking about. And then to me, there are the rules, which a lot of these enforcement is going to be a problem. I think norms should come into this discussion as well. If everybody is disclosing a certain way or everyone's behaving in a certain way, and if especially it's very clear what the expectations are in terms of use of AI, that hopefully will encourage good behavior, at least in the common case. I'm not sure it's going to be completely successful because in my observation, a lot of the people who are coming in and using AI are newcomers to the IETF. They're like, oh, I used to be scared of or didn't have the energy to make a proposal to this group, but now the barrier to entry is drastically lower, so why not? And they may not care that their reputation in this community might be trashed if they use AI incorrectly. To them, it's just throwing it at the wall and seeing if it sticks. So we need to think through those cases as well. Yep, these are the links. They're on GitHub. They're in PyPy. Pretty easy to install. The only thing I will say here is these projects are moving extremely fast. So if you do play with them, update very, very often because I'm changing them pretty much every week, if not every day. That's all I got.
Thank you very much. Questions?
Yes.
Andrew.
Oh, good.
Hi, Andrew Campling. Really interesting talk. Went in a direction I wasn't expecting, but that's good. On the sort of stick thing, I think we're sharing a problem or experiencing a problem that the RARs have had relatively recently, but from a completely different angle, which is, I think our rules are crafted on the assumption that basically everyone's engaging in good faith for a particular definition of good faith. And what this is really a symptom of is we need to reconsider the rules from the ground up, because we might reasonably conclude that that's not a safe assumption anymore, not specifically just because of AI, but including AI. So basically, to sort of pun on your image, we need a root and branch review of all of the rules. Because, as I say, just like the RARs, it's not safe to assume good faith engagement. Therefore, we have to do things differently, and that's going to be hard.
I tend to agree. I think more robust processes, and you need to look at the political economy of it. It's really this is a really fundamental change.
Derek.
Hi, Dirk Kutscher. Thanks, Mark. This is really great. Just on the policy considerations. What we in the IETF can also do is to run experiments. So normally we do this for technical specifications, but we could indeed also have a group that experiments a little bit with practices and maybe learns some potential useful policies that could be recommended.
Okay, I'll propose an experiment. To participate in the research task force, you need to give me $100 to come in the room. I think that'll solve the problem.
Right.
There's a lot of experience behind that technique.
Right. I mean, I'm looking for successful experiments.
Oh, define success.
And on the general tooling question, so I mean this is really good start, and I think this could, of course, should be taken further, and I think there could be, I mean, you are familiar with that, different say ways of using these tools. So, for example, inside-facing usage for our own community, but maybe also interfaces to the public. So, how can they better understand what we are doing? Right. And I think it could be quite fruitful to just experiment with these ideas.
Right. I think the interesting thing is a tool like this, the LLM, could make it a lot easier for policymakers to understand what we're doing. That's very interesting. Yeah.
Thank you.
Tommy Jensen, IntAD. I was sent here by commentary from the plenary when talking about the responsible use of AI in the IETF. Really appreciate the talk, but one of the things that popped in my mind was a net new fear about the use of AI, which is it would be great to be able to upskill people to participate with us. What do we do about the already challenging talent pipeline of getting people interested in our technologies and our leadership positions if they can come in, accomplish a goal, and leave having just used some tools? To that end, have you considered or looked at having the interactivity of these tools be a teaching opportunity for the user?
I've started to do that in terms of the dialogue that it encourages. It tries to actively discourage the just one and done kind of, throw this at the working group interaction. It's more, it encourages the LLM to have a dialogue with the user, to talk about the requirements, talk about the existing work in the group, and engage in that fashion. So maybe we can go further in that direction. Yeah,
that would be cool, because if there was a shared concept of terminology and framing, like starting to teach everyone or get us on the same page on what a use case is versus what a goal is, that'd be lovely.
I think we probably need to be more explicit in the IETF about that methodology as well. We probably need to do something like write down what we mean by consensus.
Yeah. Paging Pete Resnick. Hi, Brian Trammell. Plus a lot to a lot of what Tommy said. I think the way I would encourage us to think is tastier carrots and bigger sticks. I think one of the upsides of the friction of participating in this community is you actually do get to learn the norms and you understand the norms before you start to contribute. And that also leads to people sticking around for longer that we don't scare off. Mm-hmm. I see a lot of people at this meeting who I've never seen before. That makes me very excited. The barrier to entry is lower. Is there a way we can take the tools to take that low barrier of entry and turn that into a feedback loop? I have no idea how to do that. I'm willing to try and let you help. I'm playing with the skulls right now.
Thank you. Good. I like how you describe it in terms of friction, because that's how I think about this a lot. And we want to reduce friction for the things that we want to encourage and make sure that it isn't accidentally reduced for the things that actually make our systems work.
Yep.
Nick, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe to follow up on that. I certainly agree with your diagnosis of the problem, Mark. I agree it's existential for I think many open standard setting organizations. I was confused then by the presentation of the tool. It seems like you're putting a lot of work into tools that will accelerate that particular problem. That hey, we can make it even easier for people to attack the IETF and W3C and others if we give these tools. I don't know if you're just trying to make sure we confront this problem right away by making it as easy as possible, but yeah, I guess I'm just struggling to see how providing the tools is just not making it easier for people to pretend they're participating without participating. And I think actually that gets at some of the other things, is that I think you're saying, well, there's some good uses and some bad uses. I'm not sure I agree with you on the good uses. Hey, you can analyze arguments without talking to someone in the mailing list, or you can follow a group without showing up at any of the meetings or reading any of the writing. Those sound like efficiency goals, but I actually think they decrease effective participation. If I don't ask anyone, hey, is this a good idea or a bad idea, or why? We lose the sort of shared state of talking through ideas and understanding why they're good or bad. Or if I don't have to show up at any meetings or engage in any conversation or read what anyone else is writing in order to know what's going on, well, then there's less community commitment. There's less skin in the game. There's less.
Sorry, Nick. We're running a little bit tight on time, and I think that the point is clear. What are the negative sides, and that you feel that this might help those negative sides? So maybe it would be good if we let Mark answer, because there are a number of questions after. Okay. Sorry about that.
No worries, Nick. I hear you, and I've thought these thoughts as well. What kind of drove me? I'm not a big AI booster, but it became violently clear to me in the working groups that I've been participating in that people are already doing this a lot. And I came to the realization that if they're going to be doing it and we can't stop them, we might as well give them tools that guide them on better paths and hopefully guide them towards the discourse that we need to actually come to consensus. And that's really my goal with this, is to give them good quality information and good guidance so they can engage in the process with these tools in a productive way. Now, if we want to ban AI altogether, great. I'm interested to see how that's enforced. But if not, we need something to help people.
Jay Daly, fellow AI enthusiast.
So, hold on.
Yeah, a few slides ago, you were enumerating behaviors, improper behaviors, probably about the use of AI. Are you planning to turn that into anything? To sort of a list of these are the things we know that people are doing that you probably shouldn't be doing?
I believe the IESG is interested in this topic, and I'm happy to have a chat with them. So I think it's probably going to come up tomorrow.
Fantastic. So the one I would add then is what I think I'm seeing, and this is all suspicion, is people participating, real humans using AI to participate on a subject they understand absolutely nothing about, not even close, you know, and yet. Yes, which I think is actually a bigger issue than many of the others we're seeing.
I tend to agree because it's asymmetric, and that's really a lot of the basis of the issue here.
Yeah. Thanks.
Hi, Mark. So I took notes just to remember. So on the efficiency tool, is it an efficiency tool? But heavy users, in my opinion, quickly get saturated with the actual draft writing processes. So you may see it more in version 0.0 drafts. In my opinion, the impact of AI is that the consensus process that happens here no longer really needs to happen here anymore. That could be more concerning, but that's maybe for a side discussion. Then on the tooling, like these tools, like the one you just showed, IETF LLM, most R&D teams already have this type of thing already, or they have built it by themselves for a while, so there's no stopping this, I think, in my opinion. Then on the next presentation, I will show, filtering on version 0.0 drafts could actually help a lot. If you have automated tools that could flag those, that could actually decrease the burden for reviewers. And then the last one, I'm sorry if some of my emails have sounded a bit AI-like. I use it a lot. I don't know. I apologize before. I don't know if it's me, but just in case.
Thanks. Sarah Jennings, Department for Business, Innovation, Science and Trade. I have two questions and one comment. So the question is, do you have a sense of how agreeable the model is in terms of its response to queries? Because I can imagine one of the issues that could come up is it being generally positive and receptive to ideas, and then people coming to the community and finding that they are perhaps slightly less agreeable than is otherwise perceived. The second is, how far back does the corpus go? And is this something that is kind of useful for a institutional memory storage of some capacity, particularly thinking of people kind of aging out of the IETF and not returning and us losing a little bit of that. And the third thing was on the, I guess, a comment on particularly the response to people using AI and LLMs in their contributions and whether that should be considered kind of harassment or a code of conduct violation. I do think we need to consider that norm quite carefully, particularly in the context that actually the use of LLMs is not exclusive to new participants, and it would be a mistake for us to consider that that is the case. There are lots of active long-term participants in the IETF who have established reputations, who are using AI to wholesale produce drafts, who are not getting leveled with the same criticisms and critiques, whose ideas are being taken seriously. And this becomes a risk of creating an additional barrier to entry.
Yeah. On that last one, it's how people use it, not whether they use it. Yeah. And sorry, should I answer the questions or I don't know? Because I already forgot them. Sorry. Is it agreeable? I try and beat it out of it. I'm sure I need a bigger stick. I've found it especially with characterizing what's already happened, it usually sticks to the facts. I mean, of course you have to check everything. This is the nature of using LM, but yeah, we can definitely make the skills more, how far back it goes, you gather, you direct how far back it goes, basically. I think it has the capability to go back because of the way that the data tracker has kept information and so forth. It's roughly 2000-ish or so. So it's pretty good. Yeah.
Colin.
Hi. Colin Perkins. Yeah, the data tracker is useful back to about 2005 or so. It gets a bit hazy earlier than that. Fully agree with all those comments, particular for new participants, especially those for whom English isn't the native language. We need to be very careful because this is probably a very useful tool for some of them. We have an awful lot of guidelines, RFCs, if we hunt. A lot of them even provide useful guidance. It might be an interesting experiment to, maybe for this group, maybe for another, to try and put those into a useful form for the LLMs to ingest and see if that is helpful to the review teams and to authors.
I would love help with the skills because, like I said, they're just my opinions right now. I'm sure they can be expanded. I'm sure they can be based upon more solid materials. And in my, like I said, the BCP 56 one, it does a pretty good job. You put the stuff in there, you organize it in a way that's more amenable to the LLM, and it does follow the advice. So yeah, let's get it done.
It's possibly something we can leverage the directorates to help.
Yeah.
Karuna, if you can be very quick. I understand everybody wants to discuss. We might need to move this to an interim at some point.
I wasn't sure if, I think I was beyond the lock, so I appreciate the opportunity. 3 points very quickly. I was interested, excited to learn the ISG is doing something on this. And I'd be curious to hear more from Tommy actually on sort of what it is that you're doing and how you can engage the community since we're having these conversations. On the newcomers and them using these tools, I actually think we don't need to sort of frown upon the use of AI by newcomers. And it gives me sort of a mix of like, you know, oh, the next generation is doomed. They're not going to work as hard as we are. And also this idea about like the technology is going to sort of spoil them, like, you know, video games will ruin the sort of the kids. And I think it's not the case. I think it's all about guidelines. And I think that's where the ISG can really sort of signal to the community, like the expected use of it. And then I just wanted to say in terms of like who participates in IETF, I think we should move to proof of humanity and not have bots writing on mailing lists.
Just to the newcomer point, I think the issue is not so much, you know, about the newcomers themselves. It's about institutional capacity. You know, we have the capacity to process a certain number of standards, to have a certain number of documents going through the RFC editor queue, have a certain number of working groups here, and have a certain number of reviews at the same time. And when you lower the barriers so much that, you know, the input pipe, the top of the filter expands to, you know, by several orders of magnitude, even if a lot of those are good proposals, we don't have the institutional capacity to even handle that and triage it. And that's a worry for me.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mark. And continuing with the topic, we have Jaime Jimenez on measuring AI authorship on of IETF drafts.
Thank you. So I'm not such a great speaker as Mark. I'll do my best. So basically, I've been working in the past couple of months on a tool to detect AI usage on IETF drafts. It's running on this website. It's also an API access if you want to do it programmatically. I do basically, this is the methodology. So I have a set of stylistic samples that I take. So I take chunks from each of the drafts. I cannot process the whole draft. In many cases, they are like 40 or 50 pages. It's pretty cost inefficient. So I just take a subset sample. I remove all the templated information, obviously. And then I have some, so there is some statistical techniques to see the, you know, the type of wording you use. If you use longer words, smaller words, word combinations, you can plot them. Then that could hint to AI usage. Then that I pass it together with the draft to a model ensemble. So there is this concept of LLM as a judge. So you can actually ask your LLM for opinions and you pass hard data. The output tends to be more reliable. Ultimately, it still is an opinion from an LLM. So you can, none of the techniques to my knowledge, I read a few papers on this. And this was a hobby project, by the way. So, I mean, don't expect super deep academic purpose here, but to my knowledge, it's not really possible to guarantee 100% that something has been AI made. Especially if you start curating it, is really tough. In any case, for basic stuff, for things that have been a bit sloppy, then that it works well. Anyways, so then there is a consensus signal, and that is what you see on the website, basically. So the algorithms are borrowed from stilometry and AI detection literature. They are at the end of the presentation if you are curious. As I mentioned before, each signal by itself is alone. When you put them together, especially with the stronger signal like hedging, or I don't remember the other term, but like with those, actually it becomes a bit more precise. And then the drawback, I mean, one of the problems we have in the IETF in a sense is that the documents are technical by nature. It's not like a novel or like a literary text. So it's much easier to get flagged as AI. And then for non-native speakers, I mean, you would by default get more chances to be flagged. And if you use a translation tool, for sure, you're going to get flagged if you don't touch it. So that is also to be taken into account, which doesn't mean that you don't use AI, just to be fair there. These are the style statistics. I mean, maybe because we don't have so much time, I will not go through all of them. But for instance, the first two, hedging, common feeling words, like if you read load bearing or things like that, having a dictionary process, for instance, in ID needs, I will mention it, that is trivial. We should add it, in my opinion. The mean word length, as Mark was mentioning, like longer wording usually indicates AI. There's a frequency distribution. If you take all the words, you put them together in a graph, the slope is different for non-AI drafts. I didn't do the work that I probably would do now of taking all of the drafts, version 00 drafts before 2022 and getting statistical measures or measurements from those. But anyway, future work. Anyway, there's more on this. You get this type of nice report that you can read. If you want, you can also read the actual opinion of the LLM based on the report. You may get mixed outcomes in all of them, and they may disagree as well. So this is also how you tweak it. You could, for instance, Opus tends to be a bit more rigorous, so you could give more weight to Opus versus other models. You could just do statistical measures. You could do other things. Then this doesn't work. Zero. No. So there is certain dimensions that so you can query, you can ask a model that to return JSON, and then you can flag you can request certain data structures that then you can process. You can calibrate also. For instance, in my case, I make it quite lenient, so I'm not trying to trash version 0 submissions, of course. And then when there is disagreement, I just mark it as review instead of as a flag. And they basically, they don't have a lot of arguments, statistical arguments. They tend to flag it as clear. Then you can, I mean, in the website, you can see, it looks better on the laptop, but you can see the plot. I did only from January to April. I did notice a slight trend of AI usage right before the meeting, for example, but overall it's kind of balanced. From what Mark said, maybe there has been a bit of a increase here. I don't know. Again, in retrospect, probably I would just run it for a much longer period and see what it shows. Maybe this is something interesting for IRTF, by the way. If you guys have budget on these things, if you want to run it, we could do a bigger experiment. The style deviation. So this shows, for instance, these will be the drafts that are in the clear. These will be flagged, and these will be clearly AI. So about 88% of the drafts are normal, and the rest are kind of show signs of AI usage to a better or worse degree. In my experience, I use AI for almost everything these days, and I know everybody's using it for many things. If you work with the AI, it's not difficult to reach the green pass, especially if you're doing technical documents and you're, like, you have a new CBOR serialization format and you know what you want, and you just want the AI to generate it quickly, and you check it and so on, that will not be flagged. So these are probably not the best drafts out there, and yeah, so they have a strong signal for AI, but it could be that they are just translations. I don't know. I didn't went through all of them. That's another thing. If somebody has a team of volunteers that wants to verify, human verification, that helps also to train and improve the models and the system. Then by working group, this was pretty cool to see. So you can also plot based on the draft submission name, which working groups or which names are they using. So for example, you have working groups that are more about AI and about the use cases and more like higher level topics. They are more, they seem to have more AI in them. And then much like these groups that are pretty specific wire formats and byte layouts and so on, very concrete, tend to have far less AI. Then deployment-wise, I mean, as I mentioned before, you have it in the website, and you want to use the API endpoint, just use the API. You can filter with jQuery, and you just get the little bit that you want. Yeah, that's basically how it works. Cost, not expensive. So the model ensemble I use is not I mean, it's normal price. About, I mean, for $35, you can do the 1,000. Of course, if you process the whole document, maybe it's 3 times that amount. If you use more expensive models, multiply by 2 and so on. But you could do pretty cool experiments with very low budget. And you can use reasoning models. They tend to give also more verbose output. I haven't measured if this is better or not, to be honest. I don't know. Wish list. So I think it could be better. So I think we could actually analyze every version 0.0 by default. And in some cases, for instance, for the statistical aspect, it's for free, and you could just give a warning, for example, when the user is submitting something that clearly has hedging or common AI words. Then I could also increase the drafts content that I pass on the model. I think, as I mentioned, like the website is pretty lenient. It's not trying to destroy people's reputation, as Mark said. But it could be also more strict, to be honest. So if we want to give feedback to the author, like, hey, you really need to look at this, it could be also phrased in different ways. It could be showing what parts should be checked and so on. And then also the last bit. So English as a second language will have similar surface signals. Yeah, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Comments, questions?
Colin, you're first.
Hi, Colin Perkins. Yeah, this is really interesting. If I understand correctly, you're putting a bunch of drafts from across the IETF into this.
I couldn't.
If I understand correctly, what you're putting into this is a bunch of drafts from across the IETF to get a single statistical model of.
Yeah, it's analyzing stylistically every single version 0.0 draft since January.
Yeah. What I think would be really interesting would be to look to see if there are differences across the IETF in the typical writing style. You are routing drafts written in a really different style to security drafts, for example.
Yeah, like the website.
Not in terms of AI use, but
right.
in terms of the baseline.
Right, I see. Different baselines for different domains. That could be an interesting approach. Yes, I agree.
Sunsika?
Yeah, Suntica, I'm a newcomer, Central European University and Dynatrace. Thank you for the presentation. It has been very insightful. I have a couple of questions, and then you can try to answer all of them, or we can also discuss later. So regarding the ensemble model use, I wonder whether you use majority voting or something else, because in my experience, some models perform better on certain type of, let's say, sentences, and on some other type of sentences, for example, like short versus longer ones. Then the second point regarding statistical evaluation metrics, did you try to use Wasserstein distance to see the transportation cost of bringing the two distributions together? And maybe my third question, feel free to let me know if I misunderstood, but based on the picture you showed, the graph you showed, it looked as if difference in differences, I think it was the previous one, could be used on that. And I was wondering if it would be possible to take the IETF drafts before the AI was in place.
That's what I mentioned.
Create synthetic data. You mentioned that.
I mean, before 2022, which I assume that's when AI started.
Okay, but would it, okay, thanks for that. But would it be possible to create synthetic drafts based on the ones before the AI, and then have parallel trends in place?
I mean, I don't know if synthetic, I mean, so to answer the question, so the first one on the models, I'm not very sophisticated. I use, I mean, some of them are of the same branch, you know, like Sonnet and Opus and so on. So I know Opus is more rigorous, it seems. The second, I forgot the other, sorry. The second, well, yeah, that one, yes. And then the last one, I forgot as well, sorry.
The last one, so
I'm terrible. Yeah. So one of the issues I have, so now in retrospect, in Insight, I realized that I should have probably done some statistical sampling of the drafts, version 0.0 drafts before 2022, maybe by working group or by domain, create some sort of metrics for that, typical words or typical this, like stilometrics data, and then compare with the current one. And probably the results will be probably worse, I would guess. And then on the, so the results, even though this is read and is likely AI, I don't have a way to truly say it is AI because I don't know. So that is the other problem. So maybe human-based feedback or synthetic data to generate drafts that, I mean, I don't know. There could be better ways to do it. Yeah, certainly.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Jay Daly, so 3 questions for you. Have you compared your statistical analysis against any of the commercial models such as Pangram or GPT-0?
Well, yeah, I mean, I use GPT-O.
No. So there are public services that are AI detector services.
No.
via API. They do similar things, but they charge.
No,
for it,
if there is interest, I'm more than happy.
No, just curious. Do you do any pre-processing of the IDs to remove certain signals before doing your detection?
I remove only the boilerplate.
Okay, so in my usage of those commercial services, there are certain things that need to be removed in order to get a good signal from them. Okay, signature blocks, various other things confuse it, salutations and things like that. Odd things.
I mean, drafts usually don't have.
Yeah, no,
they're
they
very
don't. No, I
technical.
don't have salutations, but the authors blocks and stuff really.
Yeah,
confuse
all the
it.
template is
Right, okay.
removed.
All right, it's great. Okay, and then
All the boilerplate. Sorry.
yeah, that's right. And then my
Third
question
question.
jumped out of my head now. Okay, great, thank you.
we can talk after. It's okay as well.
So
that's it. I know. Sorry.
No. I have 3 more.
Oh, okay.
My question follows along Jay's actual question. He's talking about pre-processing. My question, based on the other statements that have been in this discussion today about AI, have you done correlation statistics or regression statistics to see that your that this information, which provides median and various averaging statistics, is actually correlated to slowdowns in particular RFC production or
No, nothing.
recorded
I haven't measured
information?
production of RFCs in any ways. But
No, I think my term was
sorry.
imprecise. What you want out of the end of the process is good text in the appropriate time.
Right.
In my statement there, I was implying the qualitative evaluation that says this set of inputs equals this set of outputs, both quantitatively and
No, I haven't done that. I haven't done that.
I'm just
Yeah.
wanted to be clear. It was a
Yeah.
question of clarification. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chris.
Hi, Chris Box. I looked at your website and yeah, it's great. You're offering the tool so people can just upload identify the draft and it will run through. My question is, are you paying for that?
Yeah.
Okay. Is that sustainable? Because
Yeah.
it sounds like it's valuable for the IETF and we should.
Yeah. I'm more than happy to. I mean, it's prototype. It's not. I'm not selling anything to anybody.
But
It's
it
just.
must be nice.
I don't work in this. I work in some other thing. But yeah. I can. Yeah. You think I could make money on this? We can talk. Oh, I'm cheaper than Mark. So, but yeah, it's not expensive. I think there was one slide on the costs. It's not.
We'll be passing the hat at the end of the session.
Yeah, thank you.
Priscilla.
Hi, Priscilla here. It's just a quick comment. I have been using some of these models to check the use of AI in scientific papers, and usually they are pretty bad when you try to check like a paper like from many years ago before AI. So if I know correctly, you didn't test with old RFCs, right?
No, with not systematically.
Yeah.
But I did pass sometimes RFCs and they rate lower.
Which was the results?
They rate better.
Oh, really?
Yep. I don't know why. I cannot. I mean, I just know that the result was like in the below 6% and below. So the lower, the better. But yeah, I don't know. This, in my opinion, the only thing that seems to be giving ground truth is really the statistical aspect. So improving that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, all the boilerplate, it's just the text. but it could be that the training data, I mean, I don't know.
Thank you very much.
So we're going to go now into a non-AI. Oh, our note taker left. Yes.
AI note taker?
So we're going to need a backup note taker. I know you raised your hand before. Okay. There is an AI note taker, but we want the human verification, all that stuff. As I said, we're going to go into a non-AI. Please stay. This has been a very interesting topic, and I haven't heard RASPRG mentioned so many times during the week as it has been this week. And I know some of you came because it was mentioned somewhere else, and this is great. We are obviously a research group. We are not in the position to define policy for the IETF or anything like that, but we can be a place where we can talk about some of these things. There have been a lot of interesting questions, a lot of interesting ideas on what things could be done, what things could be experimented with. And we would like to see if there's interest in the room on maybe holding an interim towards, I don't know, September sometime maybe, to continue the AI-related discussion. To do that, of course, we need interest from you guys that you're attending, but also interest of people to talk about issues. Maybe questions that you can come up with in the list or somewhere so that we can seed a discussion. So I guess we should do a show of hands on the thing here. So the question is very simple. Would you be interested in a follow-up interim to discuss the AI impact on the IETF? Interim, if I can. And it just says interested in an AI interim, so just please say yes or no. And we'll work with you guys on the list, assuming yes, to build an agenda and have people come and talk about this. Yes.
Is there a reason to do something in September, like urgency, as opposed to wait for the next IETF in person? I'm just curious.
No, there's no urgency. I'm just, no, I think I just don't want to, let the topic sort of die down and say, let's wait till San Francisco. No, there's no urgency. And it doesn't have to be September. It can be, whenever we figure it out. Okay. Thank you. We got some answers there. Thanks.
Okay. So I want to talk about AI. Please don't leave the room. Give me some support. So it's an initial study. Okay. I have more question than answer in this presentation. So we start with one simple question. Why drafts die or not? So like I said, we have more questions than answers. So we collected around 35,000 of drafts from the data tracker. And unfortunately, we can use only 31 because we don't have data in all of the drafts, so we can't track everything. And we have around 5,000 of RFCs that we can correlate with this draft. So maybe we can think about a conversion rate, like, okay, we have 5,000 of RFCs and 31,000 of drafts. But when we get these drafts from the data tracker, they give the all drafts updated, like version 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we needed to create a flow to understand exactly how this draft became a RFC. So it's not the correct answer for this question. So quickly, the methodology, we collect the data from the data track, RFC editor, and we create a data set. And like I said before, we have a little problem because we have an individual draft and many versions are replaced when they are adopted by a research group or a work group, and after that became a RFC. But beyond that, we have some problem because sometimes 2 drafts became a RFC. So it's difficult to mapping the correct flow from a draft to a RFC. It's not so easy. We have here 2 examples. Probably everybody knows who's in this room. Internet draft can be adopted by a work group or research group and became a RFC. Or in some cases, individual draft can become a RFC without a work group or research group. So we have some stamps in the draft collected, expired, replaced, published, active, and dead. Some small portion are dead before the expiration, but only 200. And what we did was transform these drafts in a flow or a lineage. So now we have a flow, and we can detect if this draft and all the versions that we count once, became our FC or not, and some characteristics, some features that we can infer why this draft became our FC or not. So the first another question: how often draft became our FC? So now correct this answer in the median 21%. So, but we need to look better about this result. It's not a direct correlation. We have data only from 25 in the data track. It's before we don't have any historic data about the drafts that we can track this correlation. So here we can see a peak in the beginning because they put a lot of drafts in the beginning of the year there. And it's not a direct correlation, but the number of drafts and RFCs per year, each year. So here it's an interesting thing. If we take a look only about drafts adopted by a research group or a work group and the conversion in a RFC, we can see IETF has a higher conversion rate. And from 2018, we have this decrease. Why? I don't know. It's the data. We needed to check and understand better what happens here, because we have a lower conversion from draft to RFC. Of course, here we have a better explanation because they didn't have time enough to become RFC because it's close to and it's very interesting. Like I said before, we have around 35,000 of flows of drafts, unique drafts in a life cycle. 20,000 start as an individual draft, 20,000. And what is interesting here? Around almost 3,000 are adopted by a work group and a research group. And when it happens, 7% became a RFC. And less than 1% became a RFC. So it's a strong signal, of course, for surprise of no one. If your draft is adopted by a research group or work group, they have more chance to become a RFC. But sometimes it happens the draft born first in a work group or research group without an individual draft. It's the graph in the middle. So when it happens, the draft born in a research group or work group, they have almost 71% of chance to become a RFC. But for my surprise, at least, we have almost 2,000 RFCs without any work group or research group adoption. And another question, if you check the IETF areas, what's the rate of conversion? So, of course, here we have take into consideration only the drafts adopted by a working group and the research by a working group here. So application real time have the higher conversion rate. General, the lower conversion rate. Why? I don't know. It's the data. And in the amount of draft routing, of course, have the higher numbers of RFC. And in which month we have the draft submitted? So we have this chart here. So of course, close to the meetings, but here it's October. It's not November. And I started to begin. Why? Because November it's the first week. So October we sent everything that we have to send. So March, July, and October. What's interesting, because we say many times, okay, we work online all the time, but potentially the data show that we make an effort. And how long does it take for internet draft to become a RFC? So in the median, 2.5 years. But we have a strange behavior after pandemic. It's almost 1 year more. Like if you took the last 4 or 5 years, we have almost 1 year more to the draft became RFC. Why? I don't know, but it's interesting, this behavior. Maybe I don't know. We needed to think about it. Here, another question. A draft became RFC faster in IETF or ERTF or IETF or ICE. It's another stream that we can send a draft. So ERTF take a little bit more longer. And which region has the highest number of internet draft submissions? Take a guess. North America. Yes, North American. And the submission and conversion, North American, if you took the whole data, has a higher number. But it's interesting if we took the proportion. So we can see Latin America in second place. Of course, we sent less drafts, but we convert almost 30%. So, and it's also interesting. After the draft is adopted by a work group or research group, it's almost the same rate of conversion independent of the region. But before, Asia has the lowest rate, 10%. And it's very interesting also. If you took the number of drafts and submitted per year in the beginning of the data, North America, of course, it's in the top. But now Asia and Europe sent more drafts than North America. Interesting. Here it's a short picture about Latin America. We have Argentina and Brazil in the top. Let's see. Oh, I need to run. Here it's also interesting. If we have an individual draft and we present in a presential or remote meeting, we have 25% of the chance of the draft is adopted by the work group. We are a social group, so if we defend our idea and present remotely or presentially, we have higher chance to be adopted by the work group, and here to become a RFC. Another interesting thing, the number of revisions of the draft. Of course, if you have more revisions, probably the community is engaged with this document and the higher probability to become a RFC also. If we have as an author a director or a chair, of course, more experience, more chance to become a RFC also. And if this draft go to the last call to become a RFC, we have 93% of chance to become RFC, but we have 7% did not. So, in my final presentation here, at the end of the presentation, imagine, not all the people, but if you have a tool that we can check online quickly, information about drafts and the groups, RFCs in a real time, like here, for instance, in NMRG, with the numbers of the average time to become a RFC, active drafts, regions, and so on. If you have a map, world map, where we can click and see the drafts of these regions, and we have a range of the time, like if you can choose the year, the beginning and the end, and like my small BI to create some graphs and save. So we did that. We can access here. It's draft2rfc.com.br. It's an initial version of this tool, of course, so we can prove that. So maybe we can discuss how to define what's a life cycle draft better and conversion rate, how we consider that to be comparable, this methodology. And of course, every RFC has a history, every inefficient proposal may hold election, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sue.
First of all, thank you for your presentation and your work. This is important to see how we do it. This is a comment directed to methodology and not to the quality of your effort, but the actual methodology underneath it, which, if I understood the last slide, you are looking for comments and questions. Did I understand your last slide correctly?
Yes.
Okay. Here's the problem with your methodology. Based on a 10% detailed analysis I did of drafts, meaning I actually did a hand analysis as well as a statistical analysis. The one thing that causes oftentimes changes in RFC production is after a working group does working group last call and sends it to the ISG. The ISG process has many loops which you are not accounting for in your methodology. You are taking an assumption that has been characteristic of many of the papers on IETF presentation going back to 2000. I recommend this is a failed methodology because that process actually engages several pieces of the float. And as you noted, the information is in the data tracker.
Yes.
And you can pull it out. I recommend you look at that methodology, and I offer my services if you want to discuss the substates. I think once you do that, if you go back to your float and challenge, you will find why those years in RFC production cause some problems. The second part of your methodology, which I believe the recent changes to the RFC production will give you additional piece, is there are substates in the RFC production which are not indicated in your draft. Your assumption is, here's the draft, here's the working group, it gets adopted, it gets working group last called, goes to the ISG, and the rest of the process is a constant variable. I would again state that's a problematic assumption. Third point on your methodology.
If briefly, please, because there are a number of
it-
questions.
Pardon?
If briefly, please, because there are more questions to have enough time. If you can make that third point
I have
briefly,
one more
please.
sentence.
Yes, please.
Then I will be done. But
Okay.
I am responding. Working group last calls have problematic subcycles. Just looking at all of these will improve your model. Again, kudos for working on this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Dirk.
Hi, Dirk Kutscher. Interesting analysis. I want to push back a little bit on, treating IETF and IETF in the same way. So in the IETF, I don't think we should be so RC fixated, because there are many really useful contributions into that drafts that do not even want to become an RC. And so I'm just a bit, just a bit concerned if he sent this message that, everybody strives to become an RC. That's not the case for the IETF. So let's just not equate this too much.
No, yes, I agree. It's only an initial study, and we can debate and improve that. Yeah.
Colin.
Hi, Colin Perkins. Agree. This is a really interesting analysis, and I'm really glad you're doing this work. I would be interested to compare notes on how you find the draft history for an RFC in the data tracker. I have done some similar analysis myself. My experience is that there are about four or five different ways in which that history is recorded in the data tracker, all of which are inconsistent with each other. And resolving this is a bit of a challenge. And I don't think it's going to significantly affect your results, but it would be interesting to see if the way I did this is the same as the way you did it, and if not, what we can learn from each other.
Of course, I appreciate that.
Jaime.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. It's very interesting. On the draft submission deadline, there was a graph with the bubbles and so on. I mean, I can explain that the work does happen regularly, but once you have the deadline of submission, you tend to submit right before the deadline so you can present something. It's not that work is not happening. And actually I was wondering, how can you see that? No, it was before. It doesn't matter. It was one of the slides. It's okay. How can you see that? And maybe another data point for you would be the GitHub issues and the commits, because now a lot of the work happens on GitHub and you can easily track it, or the mailing list as well. Like you can see that there is stuff going on as well. But yeah, for sure, before submission, everybody is sending.
Okay.
And then it'd be interesting also to see, rather than the country, which I assume is by, you can get these metrics like where the origin of the person is and so on. Yes. It'd be nice the affiliation of the person and the headquarters of the company. That would be more representative as to the, so you would have individual influence and then company influence and whether it has changed. But pretty interesting stuff.
Yes, we have a problem with the geography because sometimes we have the information from the author, sometimes don't have. So what we did, it's not the best thing to do, but we took the email, based on the email .br, it's from Brazil, but
there's a lot of expats.
Yeah,
I mean, I would be Finland and I'm in Spanish.
Yes,
so
exactly,
really
exactly. So it's approximated.
But very cool anyways. Thank you.
John?
Hi, John Levine. Yeah, again, allow me to echo the comments. This is really interesting work. And I don't know how to qualify this, but somebody was saying, well, drafts in the IRTF didn't necessarily fail when they didn't turn into RFCs, but drafts in the IETF, frequently the same thing. I've written a bunch of drafts where people sort of discussing something and I say, I think this is a stupid idea, but I'm going to write it up as a draft just so we have it written down. And then we talk about it for a minute and everybody says, yup, it's stupid, and then it goes away, it was not a waste of time. We needed to discuss it, and I wish I could tell you some way to sort of identify drafts that were, aimed for oblivion, so they don't count as failures. But at the moment, I don't have anything brilliant to suggest.
Thank you very much. And from draft mortality to community vitality, pun sadly intended. And we have Ilke from RIPE, who has been doing a similar type of analysis, but looking at the RIPE community and its mailing list. So over to you, Ilke.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Ilke. I'm a business data analyst at RIPE NCC. And yeah, I'm here to talk about the RIPE mailing list. This is a topic that is especially interesting lately because after decades, many people in the community are wondering whether communication might be, mailing lists might be getting irrelevant. Of course, big part of this is due to many other communications channels arising, but there is a bigger worry around the future of the community itself, as many of the very active people in the community are getting older. So mailing lists are the main communications channel for the RIPE community and have been seen as a reflection of the community's vitality. So it's worth exploring these questions in the mailing list data, which is what I did, and I'm here to share my analysis with the IETF. So this is an analysis on the RIPE mailing list, but of course it's relevant for the IETF since these are two similar communities that in a way grew alongside each other. They've been going on for around 40 years. They've had many mailing lists, a lot of them on similar topics for similar purposes. But the similarity that I find more interesting is the traffic on their mailing lists over time, which is what these two graphs are showing us right now. The graph on the right is a graph I took from a paper on the IETF mailing list, which Ignacio was the co-author of. It is the yellow line that I specifically want to show you because that's the one showing the mailing list traffic over time on the IETF mailing list, of course. And the shape of that graph looks similar to the orange line we have on the left for the RIPE mailing list traffic over time. So both of these communities on their mailing list, the traffic increased for quite some time, peaked around 2010s, and then had a decline. I should say that I don't know much about the IETF, but I hope that as I share my findings on the RIPE mailing list, it will make you think whether any of it applies to the IETF. And before moving further, I'd like to share my scope. So these are the RIPE mailing lists that I have in scope for this analysis. They're the most popular RIPE mailing lists that made it into the 2020s. Most of them are working groups and community mailing lists, with the exception of Members Discuss, which is exclusive to the membership, and RIPE Atlas, which is dedicated to the Internet Measurement Tool. So it is this scope that adds up to form this graph that we just saw briefly. We said this shape was like there was a long increase, a peak, and then the decline. But to me, this kind of looks like the shape of an existential crisis. The decline at the end after the peak in 2010s make some people in the community wonder whether communication might be dying off. But as I'm touching on such bleak themes here, I'd like to remind everyone that this isn't over. Graphs tend to reveal their true shape in retrospect. So this could be dying off, but this could just be a setback before surging up even higher, or much less dramatically, it could just be stabilizing around this level. We can't know for sure, but what we can do is to look at the state of it now. So let's focus on the 2020s and look at the current situation of mailing list participation. And I think this is a really interesting question to start off with because this is a question that gets asked a lot in the community. Is engagement driven by just a handful of people? And this is a concentration graph that responds to that question. So we have all the accounts that sent an email to one of these mailing lists in the 2020s on the x-axis, sorted from the most active to the least active. And the y-axis counts the running sum of the emails sent, which of course reaches 100% in the end. Let's make this a bit easier to read, and we get a very clear answer that 19% of the contributors sent 80% of the emails in the 2020s. So this is a high concentration, but it's also a common enough one to have its own name, the Pareto principle or the 80-20 rule. But I don't want to stop here. Let's divide these accounts into 5 groups that each sent 20% of the emails, which would look something like this. A lot of thin bars on the left, so sorry, let's focus on them.
So at the leftmost side of this graph, the top contributors, we have 8 accounts that sent 20% of the emails in the 2020s. They are followed by groups that sent the second 20%, the third, the fourth 20%, and overall, there are around 1,600 accounts that make up this graph. And this is a high concentration, even though a common one. So does this suggest narrow participation, or that there's a dedicated core? And since we are contemplating on the longevity of these mailing lists, are these top contributors old? But I should say that we don't have the data on anyone's real age, but what I can do is put these accounts into generation bins based on their first email to one of these lists, which is how we're going to proceed in the following graphs. So this graph has the same 1,600 people divided into the same 5 bands that each sent 20% of the emails. This time they're colored by the generation they're in based on the first email they sent. So for example, we have the people from the 1990s all the way in the bottom shown in yellow. And on top of them, we have people from each of the following 5-year periods stacked on top of each other, with the people from the 2020s all the way at the top. The people from the 2020s, in fact, make a big part of this graph, which is already a great sign. It means that we have a lot of newcomers in the 2020s, but it might not be fair to have them in this comparison, since many of them likely joined very well into the 2020s, which is their scope. So I'd like to exclude them and compare the other generations. So on the left side, when we look at the high contributors, it seems that high contributor groups are more likely to be from the older generations. But not all high contributor groups have the same profile. So I'd like to focus on them separately. On the left side, we have the 2 thin bars that have the people who sent 40% of the emails in the 2020s. And almost half of them have been contributing since the 1990s or 2000s. So if you're on one of these mailing lists and you're familiar with some of the people in the community, a lot of the emails that you receive come from old-timers. But these are outliers, and there's a whole other picture when we look at the other side of this graph. Now I'm looking at the groups that sent the third and fourth 20% of the emails, and they do seem more likely to be from the older generations, but less so. It looks a bit more balanced. So beyond the few very high contributor groups that we have, there is a larger, moderately high contributor group that is not at all dominated by the older generations. In fact, this whole graph shows us that there is quite a lot of younger or newer contributors in the 2020s. But let's zoom out of our 2020s focus and see how it's been historically and whether the community has been renewing itself. So this time we have the periods on the columns, and we still have the generation split through the colors. So the people from the 1990s, the emails in the 1990s, they were all sent by people from the 1990s. If you look at the graph on the left, which counts the accounts that sent an email in each period, and the right one counts the emails that were sent. So people from the 1990s in yellow, few of them survived into the next period, the early 2000s, and much fewer survived all the way into the 2020s. The same can be said about the following generations as well. Not many of each generation stayed active for long enough to be counted in the next 5-year period. But the contribution of those who survived has been significant if you look at the graph on the right side. It seems we're getting the most out of those who stuck around in the long term. The other side of the story is, of course, the newcomers. And it seems from the graph on the left that the majority of contributors in each of these periods are newcomers. And newcomers sent more emails than any other generation before them. But it's still definitely not an equal contribution. When we look at both graphs, we see that the surviving oldies are sending more emails than the newcomers that we get, which is, in my opinion, natural, that the newcomers might be feeling things out a bit before starting contributing heavily. But still, I'm curious at this point to see the long-term contributors in each of these generations. So let's highlight them. Now we are focusing on the accounts that stayed active for at least 10 years. There are not that many of them, if you look at the graph on the left, but they have sent many of the emails, as we can see from the graph on the right. But the more interesting thing is that they didn't necessarily start fast. They didn't immediately start sending so many emails. And in fact, their contribution somewhat correlates with the overall traffic we see here. So it seems they talked more when there was more to talk about, which brings me to my next point. We wonder who comes to the community, who stays, who contributes, but why people would come, stay, and contribute is very much about what is discussed, what is important, and what is going on, which can be observed through the different mailing lists we have. So let's go back to the scope to remember what we're dealing with. We already know that these are the most popular mailing lists, but let's see how they compare to one another. So these graphs show us the number of emails each of these mailing lists have received. The first one shows us all the emails all time, and we have a very clear winner. Address Policy has received the most number of emails all time by far. But the picture is quite different when you look at the graph on the right, which only counts the emails that were sent in the 2020s. Now we have a new lead, Members Discuss, followed by RASPRG. This is such a big shift. And the ranking of mailing lists shifted in every period as different topics attracted people to join, which is what this colorful mix of visualization shows us. We can observe the journey of each of these mailing lists as they, through their changing relative popularity. Among all, I'd like to focus on Address Policy and Members Discuss. Address Policy, it seems, immediately got the top spot after it was launched in 2003 and stayed there until the 2020s when Members Discuss crept up to take its spot at the top. It makes perfect sense because when we look at when Address Policy was this busy, it was the time of IPv4 runout and the challenges that came with that, which the working group had to respond to. And after the runout, with not much more resources to allocate and the shrinking membership, of course, the focus shifted to the charging scheme, which keeps Members Discuss aflame. So it shows us that traffic is very much topical and also dependent on external factors. But how much traffic each mailing list has is one thing. It's another to see which ones bring more newcomers, since we're talking about the longevity of mailing lists. So this graph shows us the number of first-time emailers each mailing list has brought. And very clearly, Members Discuss at the top brought the most fresh blood, followed by RASPRG and Address Policy. But it's one thing to bring the fresh blood, another to see whether that fresh blood stayed in circulation. So now we see those accounts divided by whether they sent an email to another mailing list later on, which is shown by the dark blue parts of the same bars. So if we look at the dark blue, it seems Address Policy takes the lead again. It has the most number of newcomers that later contributed to another mailing list. And when we look again to Members Discuss, RASPRG, it seems they don't have as much of that dark blue. Most people, newcomers, that first came to discuss membership or RASPRG didn't want to jump to other topics, to other mailing lists. This makes some sense because they're kind of different, as we highlighted in the beginning. But also considering that these two are the two most popular mailing lists of the 2020s, it does make one ask whether the community is in fact going silent as the Members Discuss and the Atlas community talks. So it's not that straightforward, but I'd like to go back to this total that we started with, but this time let's see how much each of these mailing lists contributed to the overall shape. And let's start with address policy again. The shape of traffic on address policy seems somewhat similar to the overall graph we have, and the peak is mostly driven by address policy. And we know that address policy had that peak during the time of IPv4 runouts and all the challenges that the community had to respond to. So it makes us see this overall peak under a different light. Perhaps what it shows us is not a time of peak community engagement, but a time of peak challenges for the community, which the community responded to. After that period, we had members discuss as the most popular mailing list, but its traffic is not as consistent, which makes sense. We know that members discuss tends to explode on occasion, mostly as a reaction to discussions around the charging scheme or the NCC's budget. So understandable. But Atlas, on the other hand, is the opposite. It has consistent high traffic, which again makes sense because it is much less dependent on external factors. So yeah, so these three are very different mailing lists. All lists are different. Different working groups have their own dynamics. So I would say simply comparing their numbers doesn't make much sense without the added context. It is the insights we get by analyzing the mailing list data beyond just the total number of emails sent over time that can help us interpret this shape that we started off with. So yes, we have the decline after the peak in 2010s. But throughout this presentation, we've seen that most of the contributors in each of these periods are newcomers. And even though they're not making much of the noise just yet, those who stick around are likely to talk more in the future. Today's long-term contributors, we saw that they didn't start fast. And in fact, their contribution increased when there was more to talk about because people come for topics. People don't engage with the community because they're a part of the community. They follow discussions they find important, which makes them a community. And mailing lists provide a platform for these different topics to be discussed on. They all have their own dynamics, so their traffic is not really comparable. And since their traffic also depends a lot on external factors, even the total number they add up to doesn't translate into the community's vitality, which is how I interpret this shape of an existential crisis the mailing list data has plotted so far. I hope it made you think about the IETF. If you have a different interpretation or questions, comments, yeah.
Thank you very much. Peter.
Yeah, thank you. Peter Koch, DINIC. I'm on almost all of the mailing lists that you mentioned, actually, and in your counts, I'm a person from the 90s, and I wish that was true or not. I think the remark that you made towards the end that the numbers might spur interest but don't make sense without looking into the quality or the content is very important. And that's probably also where the outliers may or may not have anything comparable in the IETF environment. If you look at the Atlas list, for example, the usual traffic is a researcher, usually a young researcher, having a project asking for Atlas credit points and then thereby generating 10 responses where people will shortly report, here's my credit and thank you and goodbye. And the respondents will usually be old timers or older timers and reoccur, whereas that initial message from the reporter will not, researcher will not be followed up. And that's consistent as in it's happening over and over again, and that's most of the traffic there. Same for other working groups. If you look at the content, it's like the IETF, right? Doesn't vote, but everybody likes to count the number of interventions. And so you see a flood of +1 emails that is also very bursty traffic. And again, that is something that may or may not occur in the IETF or be comparable. But I think, again, that remark is important. And here's some anecdotal evidence to what's happening there. I don't think it supports the existential crisis, but it absolutely deserves further insight. So please continue going into that, into these measurements, and also looking into the content of the messages. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good.
Hi, I'm John Levine. I have those were some very interesting charts. I have a mechanical question, and then I have an anecdote. And the mechanical question is, have you been able to track people when their email addresses changes? Because it occurs to me there are not a lot of people. Yeah, I mean, I'm wondering how many of those newcomers are just different addresses. In the IETF, we have a so-so way to tell that multiple. Basically, if you've ever submitted a draft, you're in a database, and we attempt to combine all your email addresses. But depending on how much extra work you want to do, you might want to go back and look at the name on the from line and see whether if an address disappears and another one reappears with the same name on the from line. Maybe it's not a newcomer. Maybe it's just an old timer who got a new job. Okay. The anecdote is I happened to have lunch today with a bunch of grad students at the local university. And they were talking about the work they were doing and all this other stuff. And one of them said, yeah, I once tried to join a mailing list, but it didn't work. And it was supposed to be the help mailing list at his university, but it turned out it had been set up 10 years ago and it was sort of an autopilot. Nobody was reading it and writing it. So there's definitely, and I said, no, really, there are mailing lists that work, and just because one is dead doesn't mean they're all dead. But I think we definitely have a generational issue that people who look like me think that mailing lists are normal. And people who look more like you or some of the other younger people here think that, well, it's kind of this quaint old thing that we do to work here. But I mean, there's so many people who say, well, we do, we use Discord and we use GitHub, and I suppose there's mailing lists. But so I think the existential issue is real, but I don't think it's insoluble.
Thank you.
Hi, Colin Perkins. Really interesting analysis. I think what would be a really interesting thing to do would be to run a sentiment analysis tool on some of these messages and see if those bursty lists are all just people yelling, or if it's other types of discussions as well.
Good input. Thank you.
And I think we have a bunch of IETF lists where it's all just people yelling. So I hope you're different.
Nick?
Yeah, thanks for this work. I think we have seen some similar attempts at this analysis at IETF. It already got mentioned some, but I am curious what you think about displacement to other communications fora. This is always the discussion that comes up in IETF or W3C or others is, well, maybe the mailing list traffic has just changed because GitHub has taken off or people are using IRC or Slack or whatever. That's not going to be some answerable, conclusive question. But I am just curious, how do we track other communications for? Maybe we could even see it in the mailing list data or something. But if we are trying to measure activity or vitality or tenure of participation or things like that, how should we be looking at multiple communications media?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question. Mailing lists are certainly one aspect of participation or vitality. So yeah, of course, there is more. Yeah, that's something to think about.
Thank you very much, Elke.
Thank you.
And for the last presentation, we have Colin Perkins with a draft analyzing internet standards. And just for clarity, I'm also a co-author here, so I will refrain to my co-chair. And let me pass you the control. Yes, in a sec.
It should work now.
Okay, so hi everybody. My name is Colin Perkins from the University of Glasgow. This is joint work with Ignacio, with Rio, who is sitting over there, and with Stephen McQuiston from the University of St Andrews. We have spent a reasonable amount of the last few years working on doing this sort of analysis of the IETF data, looking at the mailing lists, looking at the history of the documents, looking at the history of and changes in the participation. And we submitted this document to try and help structure our thinking about how to do that systematically, and to try and help provide input to the research group, try and take some of the lessons we've learned from figuring out how to do this, however well or however badly you think we're doing this, and try and pass that experience on and help other people learn from those lessons and structure their process for doing this analysis. We spent, we submitted the draft. It looks at the standards development process in general as a socio-technical system for taking input, producing documents. It looks about some of the issues of doing this analysis in terms of the IETF, how we might apply that more broadly to other standards development organizations, some of the challenges in data processing, some of the issues with ethics, data protection, and so on, and then tries to make some recommendations. And it's very much a work in progress. We're looking for input to see whether people agree that this makes sense and whether it is useful. So we start by considering the standards development process, as I say, as a socio-technical system. Standards development is a process of taking a bunch of inputs. There's some technical artifacts, internet drafts, for example, mailing list messages, software. There's various input from people, from organizations, you're reflecting their organizational interests and priorities, and from the governance process of the standards development organization, which sets the rules by which everything works. That runs into the standards process, which produces eventually produces some standards, eventually produces some implementations of those standards, and there's various feedback loops. The process of developing the standards iterates a bunch of times, and you get feedback from the standards and from their implementations back into the whole thing. We try to characterize the type of data we're working with, right? We've clearly got participants, we've clearly got organizations, and the organizations those participants work for, but also other organizations in the community which might be affecting the way things are developed. Governments, for example, civil society organizations. We've got various technical groups, working groups, research groups, areas, directorates, and so on in the IETF. We've got the artifacts, the drafts, the presentations, the mailing list messages, and so on. We've got the actual collaboration infrastructure. Is it a bunch of mailing lists? Is it Meet Echo? Is it the Jabber room, and so on? The various different ways in which people communicate. We've got the governance structures and processes, the IETF rules, the way in which the IETF operates, the other SDOs operate. And then we've got the standards and implementations that result from all of that. There's a lot of things you can automatically extract from this. And there's a lot of things you cannot automatically extract about the process. One of the things that is very clear from doing this analysis is that the type of data we can extract automatically by looking at the data tracker, by looking at the mailing lists, by looking at the conversations and so on, is obviously useful evidence, but only captures a very small part of the standards process. And a whole bunch of really critical aspects of the development are really hard to observe directly, and in some cases impossible to observe directly. There's obviously a culture to the standards development body. There's influence that particular individuals, particular organizations have in that body. There's the agenda setting process, that the influence in who sets the agenda, both formally and informally, and who's having influence in the organization. And anyone who's worked in the IETF for a while, or in any other standards body, will have a feel for that. They'll know who is influential. They know whose opinions matter and who is a newcomer who's just turned up and no one knows whether they're making any sense or not. And that changes over time as people gain experience, as they submit documents, as they show that they understand what's going on. But this is not visible externally. And while you can capture some of that by looking at measures of communication, for example, you can capture some measures of influence. They're clearly only very approximate. Similarly, informal coordination, negotiation, who is exercising power, who's exercising authority, and how is very hard to see from the data. So we can only capture a part of the process. And the data we can capture, the different metrics, the different artifacts, and so on, is very different in terms of accuracy, relevance, degree to which it is representative. If we try to turn this into looking at the IETF, there's various data sources we can get access to. The obvious one is the data tracker, which has the metadata about the process going back to the early 2000s with varying degrees of accuracy. We've got the mail archive, we've got the RFC editor website with the RFCs, the errata, the RFC index, and so on. And increasingly, we've got GitHub, and we've got things like the video recordings on YouTube and the chat logs and so on. The IETF makes a lot of data available. If you just pull the data tracker, there's about 5.5 million records in there. If you pull the mailing lists, there's 3 million emails, give or take. That's about 40 gigabytes of data. That's before we pull any of the RFCs or the internet drafts or the presentation slides or the video recordings or anything from GitHub. So there's an awful lot of data to work with. Considering the other SDOs, what they make available and how they operate varies significantly. I think the IETF is probably one of the most, if not the most, open in terms of data. But certainly, all these other organizations make some data available, and if you're a member, there's a lot more data which is available quite commonly. So there's a lot of data you can collect for the other organizations. Their goals, their modes of operation, the way they work, the way the data should be interpreted is very different across the different organizations. And integrating the data and interpreting it across the different organizations is a significant challenge. Things to worry about when looking at this data, some of the challenges that we ran into. Entity resolution is an enormous challenge, both tracking people and the organizations and tracking changes in affiliation. Certainly in the IETF, and I think in a lot of other standards development organizations, there are people who participate for a very long time and you have a significant influence and change their names and affiliations all the time. I think I appear in the IETF data tracker under about 4 different variants of my name. There are other people who are their names are expressed in many different ways, and possibly even who have changed their names. And tracking that, especially if it's not well recorded in the data tracker, is a significant challenge. Similarly, organizational names. The previous version of the slides I had, I think it was, 280 something different spellings of Huawei that are in the data tracker. And that's easy to track. That's easy because they all have Huawei in them. But tracking organizational names and the different ways in which people express their organizational name, tracking mergers and acquisitions of companies is a significant challenge if you want to track who's working for whom, and tracking organizational influence. This is also really significantly complicated by consulting relationships, which tend to be very, very opaque. And by various opaque funding sources. And as an academic who gets research grants from all sorts of people, including industry, tracking who's funding me to be here at any particular time is perhaps a challenge. So putting all this together, just figuring out who's talking, who they're representing is very, very difficult. Susan mentioned this earlier, but the document life cycles are difficult to track. In theory, this is in the data tracker. For the IETF, the data is wildly inconsistent. And for any particular rule, if you read RFC 2026 and all the IETF process documents, for any rule you can find in those documents, there are some documents in the history which violate it wildly. there is not a straightforward process of individual draft to working group draft to send it to the IASG, and then it gets published as an RFC. Things cycle at all the different points in this process in very interesting ways, and bounce between IETF and IRTF in different groups and who knows what. Right? Leadership role history is a challenge to reconstruct, mostly just because the data tracker is awful. It just really does not track who is in which role in terms of working group chairs, area directors, and so on very accurately. Reconstructing this is hard. If you try to analyze the mail archive, and you think this is easy, Python has a bunch of code to manage email messages, we can just throw the IMAP code, throw the Python IMAP library at the IETF mail archive. It does not work. There are so many malformed messages which break the Python library, especially as you go back in time. And you have to do a significant amount of cleanup of the data to get it working in common email processing tools. The number of emails that have two addresses in the from line, for example, which just break all sorts of things. There's thousands of them. And the historic data is just wildly incomplete. IETF has good records for about the last 20 years, but earlier than that, it's very, very inconsistent. Ethics, privacy, and so on is a big challenge. Obviously, the IETF has a privacy statement and a bunch of policies for access to data. Processing this is all personal data, which falls under the constraints of things like the GDPR in different parts of the world. Your research ethics committee, your institutional review board, whoever it is, are going to have opinions on this and probably should have opinions on this, as is your data protection officer for whatever organization you work for. So some interesting challenges there. I would also say be careful what you release. Right? This data is all public, but the implications of it are not necessarily obvious or well known. We did some analysis of RFC errata a few years back, for example. And we can tell you who writes the RFCs which have the most errata against them. That may be sensitive. We can tell you who is the most successful at writing internet drafts or who is the least successful at writing internet drafts if you analyze this data. We're not publishing that, but this sort of data is available if you hunt. And so you have to be careful what you release. It's potentially sensitive. It potentially affects people's careers. And this, I guess, comes to the issue with AI. The effective functioning of the standards process affects critical infrastructure. We don't want to break the organization by releasing a bunch of information that will cause a meltdown and everyone to start fighting. So, what are our recommendations? I don't have time to go through all these in detail. I don't think I have space to go through all of these in detail. But the draft makes a number of recommendations, both to the IETF and to researchers. To the IETF, it talks about the need to preserve the data, preserve stable access, data quality, take care when backfilling historical data to make sure it's done correctly, take care about the provenance of the data so we know what's original and what's derived, and if it's derived, what it's derived from and how. Managing the process changes. What's in the data tracker varies significantly as the data tracker has been improved over the years, but also the process has changed over time, and it's really hard to know exactly which set of rules the organization was working under at any particular time, and that can sometimes affect the results. We make a number of recommendations for the researchers. Many of them are fairly straightforward data science recommendations. Take care with the data tracker. It's very, very hard to do this right, and there's zero useful documentation. There's ways which look obvious of extracting certain types of data which are just wildly wrong and miss important things. And there's no public documentation of how to extract particular types of information which involve reconstruction. Identity affiliation data, we don't have good ways of doing this. I don't think we have an agreed community consensus way of reconstructing who's whom and who do they work for. And that means results are very difficult to compare across papers because everyone's doing the reconstruction in a different way. Be careful interpreting the metrics, engage with the community, try and release code, release approaches, and maybe RASPRG can help here. It's hard to get this right, so let's make sure we share experiences. So that's broadly it. There's obviously lots of different ways of studying the standards process, of studying internet governance. The approach we take is clearly only one of them. And we've seen talks, I mean, Corinne Caff has given a bunch of talks in the IRTF about an ethnographic approach to studying this, which is a completely different way of studying the organization. I'm not saying this way is better or worse. You learn different things from different approaches. If people are following this approach, do people find this type of documents, this type of guidance useful? If so, is it something RASPRG should be considering for publication? If not, well, hopefully you found at least this talk interesting.
Thank you, Colin. Brian, so we're at time, but we can, of course, stay here longer. So, but keep your comments.
First question, yes. Second question, yes. One of the things you've identified with this draft is that the data tracker is basically meant as a system for running the operations of the IETF, but it is also de facto its archive.
Yes.
That might be a question to raise with, I guess, the tools team via the IASG. I would recommend that you do that because that is actually important to understand that as a requirement.
Yep. Thank you.
Priscilla.
Hi, Colin. Following Ryan, yes and yes for the two questions. I have some comments. Sorry, it's right for me. You are right. It's really hard to take all this data from DataTech. I'm doing this for the last 2 years, and
I feel your pain.
Yeah. It's really hard, especially after saw all the presentations today. I started to think that something that I'm doing maybe is helpful. I don't know if it's a good thing to add in your draft. I read the draft last week. It's a pretty good start. But one thing that I'm doing is I'm taking the data and doing analysis, and then sometimes, okay, I only have data from this year. And sometimes, I don't have data enough. This week, I just figured out that some people have more than one country in the data track. So sometimes, almost 4,000 people change the countries during the meetings.
Yep.
So it's how to deal with these situations, not just this. Countries, but also you say they change their names and how to deal with it. So I start to write like a guide for myself and from people that are working with me. So I'm put things like, okay, this data I only have from this year, or this data has this problem, and creating putting suggestions about how to solve these problems in how to deal with them, like creating kind of guide that they can use working my projects. And I also, doing your presentation, I was thinking about, there are some AI conference or data science conference or venues that they have like a checklist that you can check if you do the pre-processing all the things correctly. And maybe this is useful for people that are working with the IETF data, because many of the meetings of this research group, there is someone that say, oh, this is not the right way to do the pre-processing of this data. This is not the right way to clean this specific data. And this happened because there are people here that are working with this for long years, or are here like for years and know why this data is missing or whatever. So maybe it's good for us to discuss this too, like create like a checklist of things that you need to think and how to deal with the data. Not exactly this, but suggestions about how to read and put like the most common misleadings, for example.
Yep.
Maybe can be really useful for the group.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this sort of, whether it's code or just checklists, this sort of guidance for things to think about when doing this analysis would be really useful.
Yeah, exactly. And especially when people come here to present the analysis, you'll be useful. It's the last thing. Maybe useful people also say, okay, this was the way that I did the pre-processing. This is the limitation that I found. So that's it.
Absolutely, yeah. I don't know what the best way of capturing it is, but I think it would be really useful to capture this.
5 seconds. 5 seconds. A lot of the people gathering stuff and data use the API calls to the data tracker. I find the rsync way better, and my feedback would be like whoever is handling that, just populate it with more data, like emails and so on. The rsync is the right tool, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, some of the data is only available in the data tracker, but extracting it in an incremental way is extremely hard. So you have to end up pulling several copies, and the tools team just get annoyed with you. Yeah.
Before everyone runs away, thank you. We don't get too many requests for adoption or publication or anything else. There seems to be a lot of interest. We're going to take this obviously to the list. The question in the slides and everything was about considering publication. We'll of course consider that later on. Of course, we'll first talk about adoption. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Very good.